How are you? How are you, man? Great to see you today. Good morning.
All right.
What's up, Great Americans?
Sir, how's it going?
Good.
All right, so we now have a full house, and we're going to be starting to pack the walls back there, which is just a great testament to how important the National Guard is to our country and our total force.
Daggum right.
I'm here for you. I am here for you. So I am Lieutenant General Jody Daniels, retired, welcoming you all here to this great event on behalf of AUSA. It's a great topic. It's good to have all these folks here and have all these great senior leaders, enlisted officers, warrant officers, civilians that support us, families to attend this morning's session. This is the director of the Army National Guard seminar on transforming the Army's combat reserve for global campaigning and large-scale combat. I don't think you can get more relevant than that. Your moderator this morning, Lieutenant Colonel Carla Raisler. Over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, and welcome to the Director of the Army National Guard seminar, Transforming the Army's Combat Reserve for Global Campaigning and Large-Scale Combat Operations. And as you can see, they gave us the premier time slot for AUSA. Our host this morning is Lieutenant General John Stubbs, the 23rd Director of the Army National Guard and Acting Vice Chief of the National Guard Bureau. Lieutenant General John Stubbs began his career in 1993 as a private first class. In 1995, he was commissioned as an infantry officer through Officer Candidate School at the Tennessee Military Academy. He is a career Army National Guard officer, having held every leadership position within the 39th Infantry Brigade Combat Team. General Stubbs commanded Charlie Company, 3rd Battalion, 153rd Infantry in 2004 and 2005 during Operation Iraqi Freedom in Baghdad, and served as the 39th Infantry Brigade Combat Team Operations Officer in Baghdad in 2008. General Stubbs served as an active Guard Reserve Officer in the Arkansas Army National Guard from 1997 to 2021. During this time, he was placed in a myriad of training, operations, and administrative assignments as the battalion, regiment, brigade, and state levels. His culminating assignment was as the Chief of Staff for the Arkansas Army National Guard. In September of 2021, he was selected for promotion to Brigadier General and assigned as the Vice Director for Operations at the National Guard Bureau. He went on to serve as the Deputy Director for Operations, Readiness, and Mobilization at Headquarters, Department of the Army. In January 2023, General Stubbs was appointed as the 54th Adjutant General of Arkansas. On August 3rd, 2024, he was promoted to Lieutenant General and assumed responsibility as the 23rd Director of the Army Guard, and simultaneously, he was assigned as the Acting Chief of the National Guard Bureau. It was a heck of a day for him. Here in a few hours, General Stephen Nordhaus will assume responsibility as the Chief of the National Guard Bureau, and General Stubbs will become dual-hatted as the Acting Vice of the National Guard Bureau and Director of the Army National Guard. I will now introduce our panelists. First, it is my privilege to recognize a veteran of our panel, having been invited multiple times to speak, Major General Dale Lyles. He is the 59th Adjutant General of Indiana and has served in the role since October of 2019. He has held multiple command and staff positions throughout more than 3 decades of military and service, including Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations at G3 at National Guard Bureau, Commander, Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 151st Infantry in Bosnia, and Brigade Personnel Officer for the 76th Infantry Brigade in Afghanistan. General Lyles also served as the Chief of the Army National Guard Recruit, Retain, and Train Advisory Council for more than 4 years. Next, we have Major General Andoni, John Andoni. He is the Commanding General, District of Columbia National Guard. As Commanding General, he is responsible for the strategic leadership, training, readiness, and operations, employment of performance, training, readiness, operations, employment, and performance of the Army and Air Force components of the D.C. National Guard. General Andoni served as the chair of the Army National Guard Modernization, currently serves as the chair of the Army Modernization Advisory Council. And finally, we have Major General Stephen Osborne. General Osborne is the 28th Adjutant General of Iowa, a position he has held since March of 2023. In this role, he serves as the director of the Department of Public Defense for the state and is a dedicated advocate for the state partnership program with Kosovo. Major General Osborne has a distinguished military career, having deployed in support of the Persian Gulf War, Operation Joint Guardian Kosovo, and Operation Iraqi Freedom. Additionally, he has served as the Deputy Commanding General for the United States Army Maneuver Center of Excellence. Now for our rules of engagement for this year's panel. Each member will provide an opening statement for our topic today. Once their comments are complete, I will ask a question. Panel members will respond, and we will open up for questions with the audience. We have allotted 10 minutes per question and answer session. Please be patient if I cannot get to all your questions for the sake of time. You are more than welcome to bring it up with my boss, General Stubbs, after the panel. Now our panelists will provide their opening comments. General Stubbs, would you like to open the discussion?
Yes. Hey, good morning, everybody. Am I projecting okay? Is this good? All right, so less than 3 months ago, I was an Adjutant General of a state, right? And I've had the incredible opportunity to come up here to serve at the national level. I was confirmed to be the director of the Army National Guard, and on the 5th of August, I formally assumed that position. And I see Lieutenant General retired John Jensen in the audience with us. General Jensen, thank you for being here, sir. Great to see you. No doubt, big boots to fill. He blazed an incredible path for us over his 4-year tenure and really laid an incredible foundation for the Army National Guard from which to launch from as we turn our attention and narrow our focus and get a little bit more urgent about being prepared for large-scale combat operations. Now let me preface everything with this, right? So I'm up here as the director of the Army National Guard, but for about the last 2.5 months, I've been serving in some other capacities. I served for about 2 months as the acting chief of the National Guard Bureau. An incredible experience, and again, it just reinforced my view of the incredible value of the National Guard across our United States and what our amazing soldiers and airmen do for our nation day in and day out. If you are not proud to be a guardsman, well, you should be. We are an indispensable force for the country, an indispensable organization that is fighting on the front lines every day, that is contributing to the safety and security and well-being of our citizens within our 54 states, territories, and the great District of Columbia, supporting our governors in a myriad of status, from state active duty to Title 32, whatever the case may be, in a myriad of roles. And then we're also simultaneously defending the homeland abroad. Nobody else does that. Nobody else can do that. And our soldiers and our airmen are doing that every day. And I'm just incredibly proud to be a part of it. So being the chief kind of gave me, the acting chief, gave me an opportunity to see that just from that perspective. Very excited about General Spock Nordhaus ceremoniously assuming the role of Chief of the National Guard Bureau today, and he's going to do tremendous things as our chief. But for a little bit more time, I've got to be the acting vice. Now, I've had also the opportunity to keep a leg in the Army while doing some other things. We have remarkable staffs across our National Guard Bureau, from our National Guard Bureau Joint Staff to our Air National Guard staff and our Army National Guard staff, just tremendous Americans, our Adjutants General, and all of our soldiers that are operating day in and day out in the 54. So they've really helped and enabled me to kind of do a couple of things simultaneously, both at the National Guard Bureau joint level as a chief and a vice chief, and now serving as the director of the Army National Guard. What I want to do just briefly is talk about kind of what I'm thinking about as a director of the Army National Guard, and kind of the way I see things and the way I envision the next 4 years of my tenure as your director. Now, like I said, we've got a new chief coming on board today, and I got to go knee to knee with him, and I got to talk to him, right? I've got to make sure that I'm aligned with his priorities, and we've got to have that conversation. We got a chief of staff of the Army, and I've had great opportunities to talk with him, to just talk philosophically about the way I see the world and the way he sees the world. We have his standing priorities, and we'll review those here in a little bit, but I've got to have a little bit more fulsome conversation with him, and both him and the Force Com Commander, General Pappas, as it relates to his responsibilities for train readiness oversight of our National Guard formations in his role as the Force Com Commander. But here's four things. Here's four things. Let me just put a little bit of history on this, right? So if you think about 84 years ago today, October in 1940, where we were as a nation and where the world was, essentially, generally speaking, right? Germany invaded Poland in September of 1939. They were raging through Poland, raging through Europe, France, Battle of Britain, all those things. A lot happening. War in Europe, right? You had the Empire of Japan that was raging through China, flexing its muscle out in the Indo-Pacific. And of course, you had the third member of the Axis, the Italians, and their campaigns in Africa and everything else. You had a world that was very volatile, a world in conflict, at war, but America was not yet there, right? October 1940, and then you accelerate about 14 months later, 7 December 1941, when the United States was attacked by Japan at Pearl Harbor, and we enter the war. So I'm kind of looking at things through the lens, through that historical lens of October of 1940, right? And it is really driving me with a profound sense of urgency. I think we've got to be urgent, because I think in some ways we are where our nation was in October in 1940. Now, that's not to say conflict and war is guaranteed or it's predestined, predetermined. I believe we can deter it, and we'll talk about that in this forum, how we're going to get after deterring war, and how urgent we need to be with that. But so the four things I'm going to talk about, I'm kind of looking through it through that lens. Urgency. We don't have a lot of time, and there's a lot of things happening in the world, and we hear our senior leaders talking about in their careers, they have never seen a world as volatile, as dangerous, on the precipice of global conflict as it is now. And I agree. So, number one, what I think we need to do as a National Guard. And we're doing these things, right? We're doing these things, but I'm looking at it through a ready for combat, ready for anything, this will defend type lens. We've got to be ready for combat. We've got to be ready to fight, and we've got to be ready to fight in a large scale combat operations environment. War. I'm not talking episodic 9-month deployments that are fought from a forward operating base. I'm talking about war. Ferocious, violent war. So I think the first thing we need to do is grow combat-ready soldiers and leaders. And that's kind of the number one thing I'm thinking about. And all this is intuitive. What I'm going to say, there's nothing that's going to be, oh, wow, aha. No, this is fundamental stuff. But what I'm trying to do is just narrow the focus, right? So when I talk about that, it starts with our people. This is a team sport. This is a human endeavor. The Army National Guard is not just made up of people. It is people. It is human beings that wear the uniform, that employ the kit, that work together, that apply the tactics, the techniques, and the procedures, the doctrine to win. So it's about our soldiers. It's about our civilian employees, our families. They are absolutely our most precious resource. And we've got to do everything that we can to prepare them, to enable them to fight. Not just the individual soldier, but their families as well. Our soldiers deserve the very best leadership and support that best prepares them, again, to fight and win and survive in combat, in war. So for me, with this first focus area, the three ways that we get about it, and we'll talk more fulsomely here during the forum, recruiting and retaining talent. The Army National Guard had a great year this year in fiscal year 24 with its recruiting. We bested FY23 by over 5,000 soldiers. We exceeded our recruiting mission, our retention mission, incredibly strong. We've laid a great foundation in which to launch into FY26. We've got to do more. Over the next 4 or 5 years, the Army National Guard is going to grow. We're going to stay at 325,000 in strength in FY24, then beginning in FY26. In accordance with the National Defense Authorization Act, we're going to go to 326 in 26, 327 in 27, 328, and 329 in 29. So we're going to grow over 1,000 a year beginning in FY26. So we've got to continue to ramp up our recruiting efforts and shore up our retention. So it's kind of a very important thing as it relates to growing combat-ready soldiers and leaders, obviously. We've got to take care of our soldiers, so I characterize it just as enduring soldier care. Everything from pay, bonuses, incentives, the way we manage the individual soldier over a lifetime of service, from the recruit to the trainee to the new soldier in the unit, all the way through their professional development. We've got to take care of them, right? And we've got to give them the opportunities to excel and grow as a soldier and ultimately as a leader so that they are combat capable and combat ready. And then lastly, within grow combat ready soldiers and leaders, we got to be just absolutely focused with respect to rigorous leader development. Rigorous leader development. So let me just summarize. Am I doing okay?
Yes, sir. I give you one more minute, sir.
How about 2 more minutes?
All right, deal.
All right, so I guess I got to hurry up. I got to talk about 3 more things. Anyway, so let me go cyclic on you then. Grow combat-ready leaders, soldiers and combat-ready leaders. And we're going to do that through recruiting and retention, enduring soldier care, and rigorous leader development. Okay, that's how we're going to get after it. The next thing we got to do is we got to build lethal units. We are the Army's combat reserve, combat arms reserve. I mean, we are the war-winning force, right? We have formations that can close with, destroy the enemy, seize, retain, exploit the initiative, hold ground. That's what we do as an Army National Guard. And we got to be lethal. We've got to be lethal. Our formations must be able to effectively respond to crisis at home and maintain a sharp warfighting edge to decisively defeat our adversaries abroad. We're going to build lethality through rigorous and challenging training. Bottom line, we got to reimagine the way that we do collective training, not only for our close combat formations, but for our enablers, our functional and multifunctional brigades, and we're going to get after that. Third, we got to transform for the future. Standing still is not an option. We hear General George talk about it. We hear the Army talk about it. I mean, it's the theme of this AUSA, right? Transformation. We've got a huge role to play in that. We got to be forward-leaning, and we've got to be mindful. We've got to be thoughtful and deliberate in the way that we do it, because transformation in Compo 2 in the Army National Guard is a little bit more different, a little bit more nuanced and complex than it is in Compo 1, obviously, but we've got to transform nonetheless. Okay? And transformation is not necessarily modernization. Modernization is a component of it, but what we're talking about is transforming the way that we're organized and structured and the way that we apply our formations to the warfight. And then lastly, strengthening enterprise partnerships. And what I'm talking about is, partnerships across the breadth and depth of what we do, who we know, how we interact with our joint force partners, how we interact across the 54 with our adjutants general and our governors, how we interact with the interagency, key stakeholders, DHS, all those things that help us in the joint warfight overseas and help us ensure the security of the homeland here within the continental United States. Those are my 4 things. Again, 30 more seconds. Grow combat-ready soldiers and leaders, build lethal units, transform for the future, and strengthen enterprise partnerships. Now, that's my going in proposition. I got some work to do with the CNGB, right? I got to make sure I'm nested with him. You take a look at the Chief of Staff of the Army's 4 things. You know, his 4 things are warfighting, delivering combat-ready formations to the joint force, continuous transformation, and strengthening the profession. I believe I'm nested right now with him, but more work to be done. So just kind of wanted to lay that out, where I am as a director right now and kind of where I see us going. We're going to do this together. And this is going to be a 54 approach. We got to be all in together. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. General Lyles, we be ready for your opening comments?
Sure. Thank you. It is indeed my humble opportunity to be here today to address this distinguished crowd of National Guard leaders and leaders around the United States. I'm going to work today on the transforming global competition and large-scale conflict in the area of talent management, talent retention, and I'm going to look at it through this lens. Over 3 decades ago, I was a high school kid that just, as I would describe it, my teachers probably would too, drifting through high school. And then upon graduation, found myself on active duty, and then after active duty, found myself in the Army National Guard. And the Army National Guard, in my opinion, is one of the greatest institutions in America. We have everything that this generation wants. And I'll tell you that because of this. It took a kid that drifted through high school, allowed me the opportunity to achieve a bachelor's degree from IU, allowed me to achieve a master's degree from Oakland City University, a War College degree from War College at Carlisle, to be the Adjutant General of the Indiana National Guard. And just in the last 2 weeks, here's what the National Guard in my state has been doing. Last week we had the Minister of Defense from Slovakia in the Pentagon, and looking at ways to stand up a National Guard in Slovakia. We had a phone call from the ambassador in Niger asking for ways to re-engage our SPP program in Niger, who has recently endured a coup. And then we mobilized almost 450 soldiers to Florida. This is all in the same week. And then we had already had a contingent in North Carolina. So those are the things that go on in the National Guard, while at the same time, we had a departure ceremony for the 38th Infantry Division that's getting ready to go to Kuwait. That's what an Adjutant General does on a regular basis, and that's what the National Guard does. And our ability to recognize the changing character of war and to cultivate talent from Gen Z, and then to start pivoting towards Gen Alpha so that we have the right talent and the right place in order to lead this organization in a time that we see the character of war changing at a very sharp pace. And so that's the topic that I'll be dealing with today. I again look at it through the lens of the National Guard is a great institution. We have everything that this generation, the next generation wants. We just have to do a better job of getting that word out to that generation. So look forward to the topic and look forward to participating in the panel. Thanks.
Well said.
Thank you, sir. General Osborne, your opening comments?
Yeah, good morning, everybody, and I want to echo my my thanks to General Stubbs for inviting me to be a part of this panel, and really my very honored and kind of humbled to be talking to this crowd. A lot of experience, a lot of smarter people out there than me, but you know, from the aspect of transformation, modernization, large-scale combat operations, I mean, we've seen this before across our Army. You know, we've seen transformation many times, but I would suggest where we are at right now in respect to what General Stubbs said. The transformation that our Army, to include our Army National Guard, is embarking on, the modernization aspects, and the focus and movement towards a different way to fight than what most of us have experienced over the last 20, 30 years. Probably the most significant time of transformation, modernization, and transition since the start of the 20th century. And we talk about moving into World War I and the technological changes, the weapon systems, the platforms, how we fight, how we mobilize, mass mobilization, mass fighting, mass war, mass casualties. This is where I see us moving today through this transformation period. From a Guard standpoint, we are a part of this transformation. We are a part of the Army's modernization program. We are factored in to large-scale combat operations and the next fight. And it truly states the significance of the total Army. It truly states the significance of the Army Guard and our divisions and our brigades and all our force structure. But the first thing I think from a Guard standpoint we've got to do is we've got to understand and see ourselves. We've got to understand where we are now. We've got to understand this path of transition. I had the great opportunity, my Sergeant Major and I, to talk with General George up at Camp Ripley, Minnesota this past summer when he was up visiting an XCTC. And one thing he asked me was, hey, what can Iowa, force structure-wise, what can Iowa grow? What can Iowa take? And I really told him in respect to General Isles here and his topic, I said, we're kind of at our threshold of strength. We can't take anything more. We can't recruit to it. We can't maintain it. Demographics don't support it. But through the discussion of what we may lose in transformation, I think we've got to, from a state standpoint, we've got to understand that aspect of the balance of force structure from a state, from a division, from a brigade, from a battalion, of what that's going to mean. And that's tag level, division commander level. As we go down into our formations, it's not only understanding how that structure changes, the fact as we transition from anti-armor companies in our brigades to anti-armor platoons, the Guard loses 3,720 spaces. And that's the tip of the iceberg. But we've got to grasp that, and we've got to be then prepared to reseed the structure the Army needs for the next fight. So that's where I see us today. Relevant as a National Guard in this transition, modernization, focus on large-scale combat, and we've got to be ready to transform. We've got to be ready to transition structure. We've got to be ready to develop our people, take care of our people, and prepare for potentially what may come. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. General Andoni, your comments?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here as part of the Army team, and it's great to be with all of you this morning. Proud member of the Reserve component, and I'm also a proud member of the Army, and it's great to be here. Special thanks to the allies and partners in our room. I just celebrated the 25th anniversary of our partnership with Jamaica 2 weeks ago. It was a wonderful event, and I can tell you right now, I'm eager to visit our JDF partners in Jamaica, hopefully in January or February. I get my choice. I'm hoping that happens. Well, I'll tell you, we have lots of challenges facing us, as the gentlemen before me have highlighted. These challenges are part of our Army, and I would say part of our nation. We have to be ready for the challenges that come in front of us, and we've been talking heavily about war fight, but there's also the domestic front as well. I'm keenly aware of the challenges in the domestic front, especially in my role as the DC National Guard Commander, with a major event coming up here in January, for which we're preparing for very diligently and disciplined as we approach January, to make sure that we are ready for the challenges that could potentially arise during that time frame. But those challenges underscore, I think, the urgency, and I believe General Stubbs we'll use that word in here as we talk in the future, the urgency of modernization and transformation in order to fight and win our nation's wars overseas and also meet the demands for domestic emergencies. If we don't do that, we risk relevancy in the future, and we risk the ability to be interoperable and be a relevant partner to the active component. So modernization transformation is essential. There's factors involved in, that we've discussed already. Generational readiness within the reserve component, fully manned formations within the reserve component will be challenges as we modernize and transform our formations. So I'll have more to say when we get into the question and answer period, but I know the Army knows this as an imperative, and we believe the same as well within the reserve component. Thanks.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, on to our first question. As the global security environment becomes more competitive and complex, the Army National Guard must not only be prepared for large-scale combat operations, but also play a role in the broader competition below the threshold of conflict. This raises important questions about how the Army National Guard balances its responsibilities at home with its role in supporting global military competition and deterrence. With that in mind, our first question is, how does the Army National Guard envision to plan to campaign globally while preparing for large-scale conflict? General Stubbs, would you like to take the first question?
I would. All right. Hey, so I think it all goes back to being prepared to fight and win in a large-scale combat operations environment. The reason we campaign around the globe is to demonstrate our preparedness, our proficiency to fight, to deploy, to mobilize, deploy, and to integrate as part of a joint force and fight as part of a larger joint force. And we have the combat credibility in which to win. If we do that, then what we're doing around the globe is we're deterring our adversaries, right? So really the real purpose, not the sole purpose, but the core purpose of campaigning is deterrence, without question. I mean, we want to prevent war. We want to prevent conflict. We want to demonstrate to our potential adversaries that we're ready, and should they choose to fight, they will lose. They will lose. So I think first and foremost, we go all in as an Army National Guard on training for large-scale combat operations. We go all in. Now, we've also have some other responsibilities and other things that we're doing across the continuum, other things that the Army is counting on us to do as they modernize and as they become more lethal through their own transformation and through their own deployment of new kit into their formations, which we're also doing at scale as well. We're involved in enduring global force management allocation plan, what we call the GIF map, right? Those things on the Horn of Africa, in Kosovo, in the Sinai, within Europe. We'll continue to do those things, and those things are really good for the National Guard because they get our leaders reps and sets at leadership overseas, at leadership in a deployed environment. It's great for generational readiness, right? It builds competency at the leader level, and it gives our soldiers opportunities to do things outside the homeland, integrating within the joint force and with our allies and partners. So we'll continue to do those things. And really, that is a form of campaigning, without question. What we're doing right now in Kosovo, what we're doing in the Horn of Africa, what we're doing JMTGU, Joint Multinational Training Group Ukraine, partnering with the Ukrainian army to train them so that they are more combat capable in their fight against Russia. I mean, that is demonstrating resolve. We're campaigning in that way. We are campaigning through those gift map type rotations that we will continue to do and that we must do to support the Army. But then we just need to turn our eye towards absolutely committing ourselves to reimagining the way that we train collectively, reimagining the way that we develop our individual leaders and our soldiers. Starts with the basics, the fundamentals, right? Starts with the basics and the fundamentals at the individual soldier level, the leader level, and that translates into collective unit proficiency. We have opportunities at our Combat Training Center, and we'll continue to have 2 opportunities a year, one at the National Training Center, Fort Irwin, the other at Fort Johnson at the Joint Readiness Training Center, where we'll send our brigade combat teams through the crucible of a CTC, Combat Training Center rotation. We'll continue to do those things, but we also kind of want to reimagine how we could maybe get more reps and sets at echelon within those types of environments to build greater breadth and depth and provide more experiences to our leaders and to our soldiers with respect to operating in a large-scale combat operations environment. We need to also reimagine the way that we train collectively outside of CTCs. We have a thing called the Exportable Combat Training Center, or the XCTC. It's been very good to the Guard. It's been very important, as we build readiness, combat credible readiness outside of CTC rotations. We're going to do 3 rotations in 25, but right now the projections are we might go down to 2 in 26 and beyond. I think we need to do more, but that's going to require us taking a look at the XCTC program and figuring out maybe how we squeeze more rotations out of our current budget. And let me just say this about the budget. It is what it is. Okay? We can't sit here and say what if or I wish. We have what we have, and we've got to make the most of it. But I think we're all in on our current global rotations that we're doing in support of the combatant commanders around the world. Again, those things that we're doing in support of what we call the gift map, we're going to continue to do those things. We go all in on our collective training. We reimagine the way that we train collectively at echelon. And then we also need to be thinking about this transition, large-scale combat operations, and what it means for our Army Guard divisions. Right? Growing up in the global war on terrorism, the BCT was essentially the unit of action, but in large-scale combat operations, the division is going to be our unit of action. So we've got to make sure that we're fully integrated all the way up through the division level, at the core level with our enablers, and that we're present. We're present around the world. Now with campaigning, 1 more minute, is it okay?
Yes, sir, and then I'll open it up for questions.
Okay, great. So with campaigning too, we need to think about how do we get in that space with respect to campaigning to crisis and then crisis to conflict. We don't want to be late to need. We want to be present in the theaters of operation prior to conflict initiation. And that's going to require some work with authorities, mobilization authorities, right? We have pre-planned authorities called 12304 Bravo, essentially pre-planned, pre-budgeted. But what happens when kind of conflict begins to simmer and there's maybe emergent need for National Guard forces to be present to maybe further reinforce deterrence? Well, we need to be able to exercise the appropriate authority, and I'm thinking specifically right now, Presidential Select Reserve Call-Up 12304, up to 200,000 for 365 days. Maybe there's a way that we can leverage that with respect to enabling the way that we campaign in order to deter. All right, so questions. What do you got?
We have 2 microphones on either side. Please step up to the microphone and ask your question, and General Stubbs or any of our panelists will be able to answer.
Okay, as somebody's coming up to the microphone, let me just say this in the positive, because I kind of said it. If you're not proud to be a Guardsman, let me just say you ought to be doggone proud to be a Guardsman. If you're a Guardsman in this room, you ought to be proud to be a Guardsman. Who? That's right. All right, I just needed to correct the record there. Yes, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I'm currently without French Army Reserve. My question is, how would you make all this fit in 39 days of training?
Man, that is a great question. What do you think? Oh my goodness, yeah. So, right, we talk about, we have what we have with respect to budget. And 39 days, I mean, for the vast majority of our formations, we got to make it work in 39 days. That means we got to be as creative, as targeted as possible. We have to maximize every hour and every day in which we train. We've got to be just diligent and thoughtful in the way we apply resources. But 39 days is certainly a challenge. I mean, typically, adequately funded, we can achieve like platoon level readiness in 39 days. And I think as we build towards large scale combat, the fundamental formations in which we close with and destroys the platoon, the company, and the battalion level. But like I said, we've also got to integrate at echelon with specific to mission command at the division and the brigade and the battalion level. So yes, we have this thing in the Army called multi-echelon training. So at multi-echelon training, we maybe train our platoons on the ground, maneuvering, but they're also tied into their company commanders, and their company commanders are conducting simultaneous movement and maneuver and supply all the way up to the brigade level. So I say all that to say it's tough, it's a challenge, but we've got to figure it out. We have 39 days for the most part. Now, when we go to our CTC rotations, we typically have about 30 days for our brigades that are there. Some of our XCTCs, we do it 21 days. But like I said, if I want to do more XCTC-like rotations, maybe it means we're reimagining the way we do XCTC rotations, and instead of doing 21 days, 2 rotations a year, maybe we're doing 15-day rotations and maybe doing up to 5 rotations a year. So what that means, again, we've got to be targeted in the way we approach training, and we can't waste an hour. We've got to be urgent and disciplined.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, Todd South, Army Times. So I wanted just to dovetail on that a little bit more, sir. If you could, you or any of your colleagues on the panel could maybe provide some examples of some promising approaches to collective training you've already seen, or things that are in the works that we might see soon for the different Guard units across the country.
Yeah. I'll defer to a colleague, and then I'll weigh in as well, kind of at the end.
Well, so Indiana just mobilized the 38th Infantry Division, and I'll tell you, with the support of the Army Guard G3 resourcing and the support of 1st Army, we were able to gin up a world-class warfighter exercise that actually put the collective elements into the warfighter exercise that prepared them to project into Kuwait. And I would say that what they experienced in that warfighter exercise and what they're going through now at the mobilization station, they will not see anything new when they get into Kuwait. All the things that they're doing now in a collective manner has been set up by both FORCECOM, Army Guard G3, and 1st Army, and it's a phenomenal training event. And so it's doable. And 39 days is doable too. But you have to have good leaders. You have to have predictable training schedules. You have to have the resources. And you put those things together, and then the AGR force puts the drill together, and they put the ATs together, the soldiers show up, and they execute flawlessly, and they come out of 39 days ready to project and to fight. And it is absolutely doable. We've been doing it for 3 decades that I've been in the Guard, and we do it really well.
So good morning, sir. Major General retired Lynn Singh. So the question I have, as we're going back to the future, it's really about logistics. And that is the biggest tail piece that we always have to deal with. So how are we ensuring that our logistical elements, as well as all of the equipment, when we start talking about pre-positioning, how are we going to deal with that? Because we've gone away from it, and now we're going to have to start going back to looking at large equipment moves, and that's a challenge for the Guard.
Yes, it is a challenge for the Guard, most certainly. And I think we've got to integrate. And when we talk about multi-echelon training in a large-scale combat operations environment, I mean, that requires us to be very intentional in the way that we exercise combat logistics at echelon, and the way we integrate combat logistics planning and execution, all the way down from the division, whether it be in a warfighter type environment, to a brigade at a combat training center, or a battalion conducting an FTX at home station. Contested logistics has to be a part of every training event that we do. I mean, you're exactly right. If we can't get the fuel, if we can't get the bullets, if we can't get the munitions, and if we can't evacuate our wounded from the field of battle, and oh, by the way, aero medevac is not going to be an option for us in a large-scale combat operations. This whole notion of the golden hour and being able to CASEVAC from point of injury back to a combat surgical hospital, as we've done through counterinsurgency, we got to rethink the way that we do those things. And you're exactly right. I mean, if we just focus on the close fight, right, and ignore the logistics aspects, the sustainment aspects, combat support, service support, yeah, we're going to lose. So we need to be very thoughtful and mindful of that. That's a great question. And if I could, back to you, I said I would weigh in with respect to some things that we're thinking about as it relates to collective training. This is, maybe a concept, right? And I talk about our combat training centers. Typically they're 30 days in duration for our brigades, and our folks go there and they conduct reception, and they do planning, and they prepare for combat. They go into what we call the box at NTC or JRTC. They fight for about 15 to 17 days or so. They come out, they regenerate, and they do everything in reverse, and they go back to home station. About a 30-day plan. What about if, we talk about 39 days a year, and that includes 15 days of annual training, continuous annual training. What about if we reimagine the way that we insert Army National Guard forces into combat training center rotations episodically 15 days at a time? Meaning that within a 15-day AT period, we take a National Guard formation, whether it be at the company or battalion level. They supplement or augment a rotation outside of the one that's apportioned to us. And then they roll in for 3 or 4 days, and they prepare for combat. They go into the contested environment or the box. They fight for 7 or 8 days, and then they come out, and then they do everything in reverse for about 3 days, and they go back home, all within a 15-day period. Again, getting our soldiers at echelon more reps and sets, not just for our close combat formations, but maybe for our other enablers as well, our sustainment, our logistics, just like we talked about, combat support, service support, functional, multi-functional type formations. So, that's just something that by no means is that fleshed out, but it's just ideas, right? And I'm not afraid to talk about ideas in public, because it might generate an idea out there in the audience that might benefit us in the future. So there you go. That's kind of what we're thinking about as well.
And we do have a few more minutes for the last couple questions here.
Major General Mark Lancaster, Director Reserve, UK Army Reserve. The war in Ukraine is now a war between two reserve armies. Russia has shown a degree of national resilience that we probably should have expected. But NATO plans for Western Europe have rather assumed a short war. That's clearly probably not going to happen. So within your budgetary constraints, how do you balance the need for readiness, which is expensive, but also planning for a longer war through regeneration and ultimately reconstitution through calling up civilians?
Anybody want to dive into that one before I do? That is an excellent question.
Well, I would tell you, I think that's part of a larger question for the Department of Defense, and then we're talking about implications here that we're talking about the draft and what that would look like, which is not something that we're actively talking about right now. But when we talk about a long durational war, I think it's important to understand, as far as readiness is concerned within the Army National Guard, we have units that are obviously at a higher level of readiness than others. Those are the ones that are going to be initially called if we enter into a large-scale conflict. But then we're going to start reaching down into the bench, right? We're going to continue to go further into the bench to reach for those capabilities that our nation needs to go fight this war, wherever that war may be, right? That, I think, places greater emphasis on what the Darn was talking about earlier, in ensuring that we have formations where we have leaders that understand how to fight, that understand and have that generational readiness. I love that term that General Jensen came up with before, generational readiness, that understand what needs to be done to prepare those units to go overseas. So generational readiness and having fully manned formations are going to be critical in order to have that depth that I think our nation requires to meet those demands in the future. I think that's a key component to being ready for a long war, if that makes sense. And that's incumbent upon us within the reserve component at every echelon to make sure that we're keeping our soldiers ready for the fight.
And sir, if I may, and I hope I can do your question justice with just some additional amplifying comments. So, the National Guard over time has really evolved. and transformed itself in the way that it's employed and the way that it's used. I mean, I think when I came in 1993, we were a post-Desert Storm organization, and we did participate. We had thousands of soldiers called up to support Desert Storm from our sustainment formations, our combat support, combat service support, field artillery organizations, but not necessarily our close combat formations or our divisions necessarily. But you fast forward to 9/11, post 9/11, the Army National Guard takes on kind of a more operational role, obviously. We are certainly employed in the warfight. The high water mark for the Army National Guard, I think, is somewhere between 70 or 80,000 deployed around the 2004, 2005 timeframe in combat, either in Iraq or in Afghanistan. And that was really sustained all the way through the 20-teens or so. But now as we talk about the 2020s, and again, attributing another term to General Jensen's tenure as the director of the Army National Guard, this idea of an integrated reserve. Along the continuum there of, yes, we are a strategic reserve for the Army and for the nation, a strategic combat reserve, war-winning strategic depth that can be brought forward as the conflict progresses, just as we're seeing in Ukraine, as frontline forces or those that are deployed in the theaters are exhausted or attrited. Army National Guard combat formations are introduced into the theater and carry on the fight. So this integrated reserve, we're prepared to do that most certainly, but we're also out there doing these global force management type operations across Europe and Africa and the Middle East. We're continuing to do those things, and then we're also doing training with our partners and our allies, training within the joint force. And then ultimately, we're out there campaigning to ultimately or eventually, hopefully, deter conflict. But again, tremendous challenge with respect to resources, 39 days a year. It's very difficult, but it's something that we can do. And yes, we have got to be prepared to follow and assume in any theater or multiple theaters simultaneously. To provide the war-winning force for the Army and for the nation. But then we're also going to have responsibilities in the homeland with respect to homeland defense, and then maybe even generating and training that third tranche of follow-on forces should conflict extend into a greater protracted type scenario measured in years, not months.
Sir.
I hope that was helpful. Yes.
We have time for one last question before we have to move on.
Okay.
Very fast. I'm Colonel Pidanski from Slovak Armed Forces, and I'm very proud that this year we are celebrating 30 years of state partnership program within the National Guard. And throughout the years, we also became not only partners but very strong friends. But as we are now speaking about futures and transformation, I would like to place one very specific question. And finally, everything is about the people, about their skills and minds. And so I would like to ask all the generals, but especially General Lyles, how does the state partnership program contribute to developing talents for the National Guard? So,
great question. Great question.
If you could speak about
campaign
this kind of connection, I would be more than glad. Many thanks.
Sure. I think if I heard right, how does the state partnership add to talent management, talent retention? And I'll tell you, for me, I believe, first of all, that the state partnerships actually do build readiness, because whenever we have any state partnership engagement, we set forth training objectives, whether they achieve individual readiness or squad level readiness or staff level readiness through mill-to-mill exchanges or battalion CPXs that we do regularly. We really try hard to work at building readiness on those engagements. But here's what I'll tell you it really helps with. So you take a squad or a platoon from the Indiana National Guard and you send it to Slovakia or Niger or any other country, and they get a wealth of knowledge in how to prepare and project and land in a foreign country and work with a NATO partner, something that they would never experience by just doing annual training periods at Camp Atterbury in central Indiana. And so it provides a wealth of knowledge, and it builds readiness, and it teaches them about culture and understanding about the NATO relationship and Article 5, if necessary, that would put them into a country to defend that country's democracy. And so it goes a long way with culture and language and things of that sort. Then it also provides purposeful training and meaningful training to our soldiers that adds to retention. And so it helps with retention rates because soldiers feel like they're challenged and there's something bigger than themselves. So for me, the state partnership program is immensely important to developing talent and retaining talent in our forces.
Hey, and if I may too, is on the subject of campaigning, I mean, what better way, and we've proven it time and time again since we initiated state partnership in 1993. I mean, it is the ultimate economy of force when it comes to campaigning. We are campaigning, actively campaigning through our state partnership program. I had an opportunity to spend some time with a Component 1 or active Army SFAB, Security Force Assistance Brigade commander yesterday evening, and he talked about the incredible value of our state partnership program and how it just across the globe sets conditions for him and his team to go in there and do what they need to do at the tactical level. I mean, it's micro campaigning, but it delivers macro type results. It's amazing what it does with respect to our relationships across allies, partners, and friends, access, and just the experience that it gives our soldiers, like General Lyles talks about, how it makes them better, but at the same time, it just strengthens relationships across the globe. And if we have to fight in the future, we're going to be fighting globally. And we will be leaning on these friendships and relationships, these partnerships that we've established over these many years through state partnership programs. So I firmly believe the SPP is an incredible tool in our toolkit with respect to Army National Guard campaigning.
I think that's a great lead into our next question. As we look ahead to the challenges of large-scale combat operations in a contested environment, it's important to recognize that the experience of today's Army National Guard leaders have been shaped largely by counterinsurgency and stability operations during the global war on terror. Transitioning to the complexities of high-intensity warfare presents unique challenges for leadership and force readiness. With that in mind, my next question is, what personnel challenges does the Army National Guard forecast in preparing for large-scale combat operations in contested environments after being shaped by the global war on terror for more than 2 decades? General Lyles, as the previous RAC chair for Recruit, Retain, and Train, would you like to respond?
Sure. And that is absolutely a war college question. So being an infantry officer, I'm going to break it down so that I can answer it and at least get my 3 and get a go. So anyhow, I'm going to break it down into 3 components. So the first component is overcoming the personnel challenges associated with building combat power for large-scale combat operations. Secondly, the contested environment, and then finally the leaders shaped by the global war on terrorism. So I'll start with that. And so if you look at the leaders of today that were shaped by the global war on terrorism, it's men and women like those that are sitting here that are primarily, for the most part, in operational and strategic positions. We don't see them at the tactical level because of time and things that have passed. And so what we learned from that particular era is that we can project combat power across the globe, and we can meet the ready-to-load dates, the latest arrival dates mandated by the theater each and every time. And the National Guard did that for 13 plus years, and we will continue to do that. So we have a lot of lessons learned at the operational and strategic level about projecting power, about mobilizing soldiers, about putting soldiers in formations, building formations, and sending them into contested environments. And so we need to take those lessons learned and keep those lessons learned. As the former adjutant from Maryland indicated, we have to pull those lessons back up, use those lessons, because projecting quickly and rapidly in a large-scale combat operation is paramount to victory. And we know how to do that. The Guard does that very well. And so I think from that, we'll grow from that. I also think that we are smart enough to recognize that things that worked and perhaps didn't work in that particular environment are not necessarily going to move into this environment and work or not work. So I think we can use that to leverage our lessons learned from the global war on terror to make us better. And then let's look at the contested environment. And so for me, the contested environment is the driver. That is the driver behind talent acquisition and talent management because of this. If you look at the international security environment, it is more contested today because of great powers competition, because of violent extremist organizations, because of a whole host of things that are going on right now, not to mention the proxies and all the things that are going on with Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas and all those that the director mentioned. That is the contested environment, and the driver behind that is the changing character of war. And so the nature of war is constant, but the changing character of war is very rapid today, and it is very sharp. And so when you look at what's going on in that particular space, you'll see that we see anti-satellite, anti-access, area denial, cyber, electronic warfare, and a whole host of things that are driving technology changes, which then lends itself to how do we develop policies and strategies to acquire talent to be able to handle that technology. And for the most part, the character of war changes and that rapid technology changes is generally at the tactical level, which then we put into our strategies for developing policies to acquire talent and to retain it. And so then that moves me into overcoming the last part of the question, overcoming personnel challenges to prepare soldiers for large-scale combat operations. And what I'm always cautious of when I think about large-scale ground or large-scale combat operations, I think about tanks on tanks, airplanes, all the things that kind of grew up in the Cold War era, preparing our soldiers and formations for a fight with Russia and a frontal assault. You know, the last time I checked, there's not an adversary out there that wants to fight America in a frontal assault because they will lose. And so we're still going to have to worry and work along the periphery and to build talent that understands that technology and how to handle that technology in the periphery and things below the threshold of war. And so I've got 4 recommendations on overcoming these challenges. I'm sorry, 5. The first is, and I mentioned this in my opening comments, in order to acquire talent and retain talent, we must always recognize that the Army National Guard is a great institution, and we have everything that this generation wants. We have service above self. 60% of Gen Z in the civilian sector is unhappy with their job and looking to change because they don't have a purpose and a meaning to come to work. Gen Z wants a purpose. They have to have a reason that's bigger than themselves to come to work or they won't stay. The National Guard, Army National Guard, offers that to every American that can qualify to join our organization. A sense of service and a sense of purpose beyond yourself, both for your state and for the federal government. And so the 400 soldiers that we have and airmen that we have deployed in 2 states right now, helping with recovery operations from 2 hurricanes, they will come back full of energy and vigor because they just did something bigger than themselves. The pandemic showed that to me in spades because our retention rates are through the roof because people had a purpose because they were saving lives. All right? And then you look at this institution has all of the benefits to put someone into a job that is purposeful, cyber, military intelligence, which I don't know why you'd want to do any of that when you can be an airborne ranger. We have all of that in the National Guard. And men and women can join our organization and they can get that personal discipline and all the things they need to be successful. And this generation wants that. Generation Alpha is going to want that same thing, and we need to be cognizant of that. By the way, Generation Alpha, the next recruiting generation, is 11 years old right now. That seems young, but guess what? They'll be going into high school soon, and we've got to start pivoting our efforts towards that. So that's the first thing we have to be cognizant of. Second, accessions and retention continuities. We are always in a crisis in recruiting with money and resources, and the director should not be faced with a challenge to pull money from the 3 to pay bonuses. We have got to program these things out so that we can sustain at least 40,000 sessions per year soon, and an attrition rate around 10 to 11%. That's healthy because of retirements and medical. And in order to do that, we need to resource it so we don't have to go into the PBAC and try to take money from the 3 and the 4 to pay bonuses and whatever else we're looking to do. And I think we've really got to figure that out so that we're not in a crisis, so that we're steady state operations. And you don't always have the rack chair, hey, let's take it from the 3. We don't need that money for this. And then the 3 calls me up and gives me a bad email. So anyhow, I think a continuum that puts that on a solid footing so the director's not faced with decisions that he ought not have to be faced with. 40,000 sessions is going to be what we'll have to have soon, and we need an attrition rate right around 10%, and we can't achieve that with the right policies. The next thing is we got to leverage technology. MHS Genesis came alive on my watch as the rack chair, and I'll tell you, I probably fielded no less than 10 calls a day for that first year on how hard it was to get someone through that process and into the Guard. Well, we finally have worked that out, and MHS Genesis is providing medically fit soldiers that are making it through the MEPS process at a much more rapid pace. We still got work to do there. We have to use artificial intelligence, machine learning to be able to help with prospecting. We are using way too many man hours in order to prospect someone to join the National Guard. And we have to use technology and get smarter about how to do that, and we got to teach our recruiters how to do that. Social media platforms, all of those things, and then teach our recruiters how to close the sale with a face-to-face engagement. Understanding the environment. 77% of high school students are not qualified to join the military today. That's a DOD statistic. Somebody fact-checked me on that when I used it the other day. 77% of American high school students are not eligible to join the military today because they need some sort of a waiver or something in order to be able to qualify them to join. We have to understand that. And we have to understand when we put a young 22-year-old kid in the recruiting formations that 77% of his audience is not qualified to join. That's very difficult in this environment. I've got some solutions on how to get past that on my 5th recommendation. Second thing is we must do a better job of transforming our accessions and retention standards to meet Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Okay? The director talked about austere environments and the harshness of large-scale combat operations. We have to have programs that meet Gen Z and meet Gen Alpha to teach them this and to help them understand the physical and mental requirements in order to survive and be in an environment like that, and that's difficult to do. And then 5th, we have to be innovative, and by that I mean this. So I talked about 77% of the population not being eligible to join the military. Now, I'll qualify that with some might just need a waiver. When you say that to an 18, 19-year-old kid, they think the world is coming to an end. They're a little bit on the fence anyways, and they'll walk. They will walk away from you, even if it's a simple medical waiver. It really drives them away from the recruiter. So how do we get past this 77%? Well, we have programs like the Future Soldier Prep Course, phenomenally successful. But I will tell you this, I believe that there's other ways to get after this as well, and it starts in high school. I partnered with the Department of Education, Dr. Katie Jenner back in Indiana, and she is redesigning the high school diploma, and there's going to be the core 40 classes that you have to have in order to graduate, but she's going to put 3 seals on top of that our students can travel down this path. The first is enroll, which means go to college. So that'll be extra things with that core 40 that students will do. The second is employ, which will be go right into the workforce. And then the third, she's partnered with the Guard, is enlist. And so we will put our recruiters and some of our AGR readiness NCOs and others into the high schools, and we will help with a curriculum that teaches, starting at the freshman level, what it takes to be to enlist in the military, so that you don't graduate high school and say, I want to enlist, and then figure out you can't because you've had a serious misdemeanor and you can't get a secret clearance. or you've taken some prescription medication that disqualifies you from joining unless you come off of it for a year. And so I'll tell you, I think this is going to go a long way with taking that 77% that's not qualified to join and putting them into a category that teaches them that in order to join, you have got to pay attention to algebra, you got to pay attention to your comprehension classes, because we have an ASVAB test. Although its standard is not really high, most high schools, a lot of high school students are struggling with getting past it, and perhaps that will help. And then the physical standards, which disqualifies a lot of this particular generation, helping them understand what it takes to physically qualify. And then finally, the moral or ethical standards it takes to be able to become a member of the military, because you have to have at a minimum a secret security clearance to even join. And teaching that inside the high schools would go a long ways with helping to reduce that 77% and opening the aperture for our recruiters to get after. I think if you take the Future Soldier Prep course and you start putting some of that into high schools with this high school diploma redesign, it'll go a long way. The other thing too is any counselor that has a kid that comes into them that says, I want to do the enroll because I want to go to college, they automatically pivot them to the enlist seal as well, because the Indiana, we have laws that will pay 100% of your college tuition if you go to a state college. So you can do the enlist seal right on top of the other two. If you want to go into the trades, we're working legislation to pay for trade school. So I think that's going to go a long ways. Those are innovative ideas that we, as a National Guard institution, need to continue to work to try to reduce that 77% that aren't qualified to join. The other thing is finding gaps. So we are partnering with U.S. Army Recruiting Command to establish an enlisted training corps in our community colleges. Community colleges also offer an opportunity for kids to learn about the National Guard and to become members of our institution. It's an institution that we haven't paid a lot of attention to. We're partnering with the Army Recruiting Command to establish the Enlisted Training Corps at a community college in Indiana, and I think it's going to cultivate a lot of recruits in our state. And then secondly, benefits. Gen Z and Gen Alpha do not appreciate benefits like millennials and baby boomers and X's. They want them, but they don't appreciate them as much as they appreciate service above self. And so we have to get an understanding of benefits, because it's a fight every time we go to talk about retention bonuses. Does not drive retention. And so I think in inflationary periods it does, because people need the money. But we have to have a better understanding of benefits, and we have to understand what drives the sessions with benefits so that we can be more prudent with our money. And we also have to understand where we're going with retention benefits as well. So again, it's not in a crisis whenever we try to go and look for the money. So innovation plays a large part. So just to recap, we have everything this generation wants, sessions and retention continuities that put things on a predictable, consistent glide path so that we're not in crisis. Do a better job of leveraging technology, understanding the environment, and finally continue to innovate our sessions policy so that we get after markets that open the aperture for people to join the National Guard.
Thank you, sir. At this time, we're going to hold the rest of the questions until the end. That way we can get through our last two discussion points. Great plan never survives first contact. So let me move on to our next topic here. Before we dive into the next topic, it's important to clarify the difference between two key concepts often discussed in military planning: modernization and transformation. Modernization focuses on upgrading existing capabilities and technologies, while transformation involves creating a new structure or way of operating to address future threats. The question we will explore is, for the Army National Guard, what does transforming for the future fight mean as compared to modernizing National Guard units? General Andoni, would you like to take this question?
Yeah, thanks, and I'll try to buy you back some time. Real quick, so I believe modernization, with modernization, equipment is the driver for change. That's my personal opinion. But I think under transformation, the driver for change is really looking at our adversaries and the way they fight. And I believe that, obviously we have to do both if we're going to fight and win our nation's wars in the future. I think this particular impact has been felt within the reserve component, within the Army National Guard, with the Shadow UAV system, which has been discontinued by the Army effective 30 September of this last year. So anyone familiar with the Shadow? It was a UAV that was in our BCT formations, Brigade Combat Team formations, and a lot of people called it the lawnmower in the sky. It kind of reminds me of waking up at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday when my neighbor's mowing the lawn. That's the sound you hear when you hear the Shadow flying overhead. Everyone clearly understood. The Army clearly saw that it was irrelevant system. It was not going to survive on the modern battlefield, especially if you look at everything going on in the Ukraine today. You know that it's a system that is not going to survive on the modern battlefield. So, great. Got to discontinue that. Got to move on. You know, obviously the enemy's showing us that we got to transform, right? We got to change the way we do business. And the Army, this is a total Army issue. The Army is caught up in that right now, along with the reserve component. But that creates challenges for us in the reserve component. So when the Shadow went away, we have all these highly trained UAV operators that have spent multiple years on these systems, have gotten an extensive amount of training on these systems. So what do you do with these people if you want to retain them, right? That's key. That's number one. It goes to General Lyles' point from before. You want to retain this talent. And two, how do you maintain that readiness when you don't have a system to train on? And so this is just one example of many examples across the board. And one of the ways we're trying to offset this within the Army National Guard is we're trying to leverage three things. One, NGRIA. We do have the National Guard Readiness Enhancement Account, which we're using to offset some of these things. So in the case of the Shadow, you know, we're looking at procuring commercial off-the-shelf UAV solutions to fill the gap, right? Because we know there's a gap here that the Army can't fill. We need the equipment, so we're coming up with a way to leverage NGRIA to offset that problem. Another way we can get after this is through cascading equipment, and so you know, while we may not have the most modern equipment, the active component may have something that's a little better that can cascade down into Compo 2 and 3. While the Army is modernizing Compo 1. So that's another way we can potentially get after this as well, is through cascading equipment. And then finally, by participating in experimentation at CTCs or at our XCTC formations, if there's an opportunity for industry to provide equipment to us under an experimental basis, that's another way we can get after training on equipment and keeping our soldiers ready for the fight in the future. So those are just some ways we're trying to offset. But these challenges will continue in the future as we modernize and transform in context. And that really is what transforming in context is all about. We have to move with urgency to modernize and transform, but that will create challenges. And as leaders within the Army National Guard and within the reserve component, we got to find ways to be innovative and use the tools we have to maintain readiness for today.
Thank you, sir. For our last question we'll have today is, the Army National Guard plays a critical role in supporting the Army's overall readiness and ability to respond to a variety of global threats. As the Army continues to shift its focus towards preparing for large-scale combat operations, the way Army National Guard trains its soldiers becomes increasingly important. With evolving threats and the need to integrate new technologies and operational concepts, changes in training practices are essential. With that in mind, our question for today is, do you envision any changes in how the Army Guard needs to train as the Army continuously transforms and prepares for large-scale combat operations? General Osborne, would you like to take this question?
Certainly. Yes, I do.
Great question.
I think, you know, as General Andoni said, you know, as we transform, we're going to continue to transform over a number of years, and as we transform in contact, as we do deliberate transformation, and I mentioned it earlier, the first thing we've got to do, especially at our higher echelon, our divisions, our brigades, is understand how to fight as we transform to these new formations. Divisions have to understand their responsibilities. The staffs have to understand how to employ what divisions now control in a fight. And as we mentioned, movement from global war on terror, it's a nuance, especially in the Guard, for our divisions to be able to do that. So there's one, when we talk about our brigade staffs and our division staffs, understanding their capabilities now and how to fight, how to employ those. As we move down, I think leader development needs to be a specific focal point of change. I don't believe, well, I'll say I believe that we need more emphasis on leader development at the junior leader level, at the company grade officer level, at the NCO level. And I believe our last 20 years or so have really pulled the initiative and the skill of those leaders in what they do and what we expect them to do, particularly in a large-scale combat scenario. So I think our whole leader development concept has have to change for our NCOs and our company grade officers. We've got to teach them how to think, how to be more decisive and make decisions, use initiative, understand intent, and operate under the premises of mission-driven orders and mission command. And we've talked mission command for a number of years, but I don't believe we've allowed our junior leaders to truly execute on the intent given by a commander, a higher level commander. And then finally, as we talk about individuals, you know, it's no surprise we need to get in the field, we need to get in the dirt, we need to train more to develop the sustaining aspects of our formations, the endurance of our formations, complete formations. But the big question, and it came up earlier, the big question is how do we do that, given the constraints that we have, the funding, and funding's what it is. We've got to make do with what we have, but time is probably the biggest constraint. So how do we do that? How do we change the focus of how we train now for large-scale combat? And I really think there's got to be a cultural shift in how we approach our business in the National Guard, in the reserve component. You know, we transitioned from Wednesday night UTAs many years ago to weekend UTAs and annual training. And we know that a lot of states, a lot of formations, brigades, divisions, battalions have started to chew on this and extend out UTAs over different periods to hit high collective opportunities, particularly before a mobilization or a CTC. But I think the new norm in the Guard or the reserve component has got to be a shift in how we train our soldiers. And it goes back to people, it goes back to care for our force, the expectations of who we bring in and what the Guard is. And the expectations are clearly not 2 weeks or 2 days a month, 2 weeks in the summer, hasn't been for a long time, but I believe the culture has got to move forward in how we slice out that training calendar and how we train our people. We talk about the technology expansion as we continue to transform and probably more importantly how we modernize. But we're a land combat force, so the technology within the Army is still expected to be in the field, in the dirt, for a duration of time. So we've got to get in the field, we've got to do multi-echelon training, we've got to chew off different aspects. 1 weekend a month isn't what it is. And we've got to, you know, CTCs are few and far between, but we got to find the advantages to get into a CTC, maybe for a small portion like General Stubbs talked about. We've got to find opportunities with other exercises, be it in the Army Reserve or be it with Compo 1. How can a small unit, how can an entity get involved? We've got to look for OCT opportunities for our NCOs and our junior officers to give them the opportunity to see other formations. So just touching it, yes, it's got to change. How we change it, I think, is the key question here. But we've got to understand how to fight with transformation.
All right, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, panelists. We will open up for just a couple of additional questions, and then General Stubbs will make his closing comments.
Marty Umbarger, been retired for almost 2 years. Commander of the Brigade Combat Team with the CTC.
Can you go to the mic, please?
That young man right up there that's part of your family is one of my captains that we learned from CTC.
Hey, Ben, could you get General Umbarger the mic there?
I heard a lot of things today. We talk about how limited resources and how we can do to be able to fight large-scale operations initially and survive. I just want to piggyback on something you said, General Stubbs, that I think you might have something. Every one of my subordinate officers and NCOs said the thing they learned the most about combat operations when they were able to do CTC rotations. The more often you can get that exposed, whether it's, and that 15-day, that's all we're limited to, I just say to you, I think you've got something. I think you've got something there that we need. If you're only going to get 2 of these a year, we got 27 brigade combat teams, do the numbers. When is there going to have an opportunity for it to experience this with the limited resources? But on a 15-day annual training period, if you can put key NCOs and key leaders into rotations, however well they can get it, whether they get in there for a few days and they get 7 days in the box, I think you've got something, and I think you ought to try to do something with that.
Yes, sir, indeed. Yeah, thank you for that, General Umbarger. Yeah, that's our whole thing, right? So my first annual training as an infantry platoon leader was at the JRTC, and I can tell you without a doubt, that was a formative experience for me as a young lieutenant platoon leader, and it really shaped the way that I viewed training, the way that I viewed my profession as a leader and my responsibilities, and it was just really formative for me. The issue is, like you just kind of described, I mean, if we don't get our leaders, our soldiers, both officer, non-commissioned officer, and our soldiers, exposures to those reps and sets in a rigorous training environment, whether it be at a CTC or our own ex-CTC or ex-CTC-like experience, you know, we're failing. I mean, we're not preparing ourselves adequately. And you run the risk, right? I mean, it might be every 7 or 8, 10 years between CTC rotations across our 27 brigade combat teams. Hey, Ben, over to you.
Hey gentlemen, Ben Sims, Consortium for Health and Military Performance. Recently retired. First of all, thank you for this panel and for everything you do for our large family of 366,000 service members that are out there. As we talk about transformation and modernization, CTC rotations, state partnerships, being the combat reserve for the Army, and just being an overall RAD formation for this country.
Like RAD is good, right,
RAD
Ben?
is good.
Okay,
yeah.
like,
you know,
yeah, there you go.
I love the Army National Guard. It served me a lot. It serves the communities that we live in a lot. As we look at that, that's a lot of demand. That's a lot of demand with very little resources on our E4s, E3s, E2s, E1s, platoon leaders, and their families. So my question is, as you look at the evolving missions of the Army National Guard and increased demand, it creates a multifaceted, complex problem set for families and service members as far as time involved in training. And when you talk about the sessions, you have to be competitive. And when you don't have a deployment under your belt, you might not be as competitive. So that PME, and then on top of that, additional schools like Ranger School, in order to be competitive as an officer or as an NCO. What could potentially work? What could the National Guard leadership do to potentially work on that life balance that causes chronic illness later in life because of the stress and demand of just putting on the uniform?
I'll take that. So here's what I'll tell you. The chronic demand has to be managed, and that's up to the Adjutant General to do that in each state and his staff or her staff. And so for me, I lay the priorities out for my staff and my Guard formation, and it's my priorities. It's God, family, National Guard. Starting to change God, family, country, but it's God, family, National Guard. So your religion comes first, your family comes next, and then if you're a traditional soldier, it is your civilian employment and then the National Guard. And if you balance those things in that way, you can be a viable component of this high purse tempo that we have. Op tempo is the 39 days of statutory training, and then the op tempo is what we add onto it. And so the governors got onto the invaluable resources that the National Guard offers because of the pandemic, and now you see us being used in non-standard ways that were not used pre-pandemic. That is putting a little bit of pressure on the formations. However, it's manageable. And again, it goes back to a purpose-driven formation that stays in the Guard. So I can tell you, we were in Kosovo last year, and almost every soldier that went to that was a volunteer. And the division that just deployed, almost every soldier a volunteer, except for a few. And the 50 soldiers that I have in Texas on the border, all volunteers. And for the most part, everyone that's in Florida and North Carolina volunteers as well. Guardsmen want to deploy. They want to be viable. They want to be a component of that. We have a great family program, J9 work and resourced, and it helps our families. We have to continue to sustain that. We have to continue to balance our state mission with our federal mission, and it's doable if you stop and do predictive training schedules and you stay consistent with your mobilizations. All those things are achievable, and we must sustain our relevancy in both the state and federal missions if we want to continue to be a viable component to our national security strategy.
Cool.
Yeah, I know we're about out of time. Can I add a plug to that? I absolutely what General Isles says. We've got our integrated primary prevention workforces out there in all our states. We've got to leverage those. Commanders, leaders, tags have to leverage those to identify what is the stress of the force? What are the issues in our formations? And we've got to utilize the talent of these experienced civilians that we hire into these positions to help explain what the results of those surveys are, what the results of the DEOXs are. How does a commander get ahead of that? And we got to fight to maintain the resources for that program as well. But setting expectations and understanding the stress, I think, is the start of how do we take care of our people.
Thank you, gentlemen. Sir, I'm going to pass it back over to you, General Stubbs. If you have any additional questions, the panelists will be available for a few moments, but that way we can move people on to their next events. Thank you.
And if I may, you're standing up there. I want to respect your willingness to ask.
I'm just a civilian in the room.
You're not just a civilian. You're part of the team. We're all in this together, brother.
I had a question because I heard a lot of amazing stuff today. And one of the things that keeps getting talked about, and I talk to a lot of my friends, close friends who have served, is that Gen Alpha, Gen Z preparedness. And one thing that we all talk about is, kind of the Boy Scouts of America and what's happened to that and kind of the hollowing out. And is there any appetite for, the DOD or any branch of the military to kind of step in and fill that role? Because I'd be curious as to how many male service members in this room were in the BSA and felt like that was kind of the start of their, patriotism and sense of service and all that. So that's why I'm a little nervous. Apologies.
Don't be nervous. And that's a great question, right? I mean, you think about, I talked about October in 1940 and what was happening within our nation in October in 1940. We're a post-depression country, and what organization kind of brought our young men back from the brink? It was the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, and that was done up underneath the Department of Defense and the United States Army, and that was a key underpinning in terms of preparing our young men for the rigors of combat, right? Because they were out and about in rural America, building projects underneath a military chain of command, military discipline, and that was a very key component. What I would offer, though, is that there's no better place for a young person in this nation than to join the daggum National Guard, specifically the Army National Guard. And this is my mantra as a tag for Arkansas: no better place. No better place. We are a first choice destination for today's youth. First choice. You can go to college if you want, second choice. First choice is joining our friggin' organization. You will not find a better organization because there's no better people, there's no better opportunity, and there's no better deal than what you'll find in the National Guard, without question. Thank you for your courage to stand up and ask that question. Hey, real quick, and I know we're just about out of time. We got to be proud of who we are as Guardsmen. And let me just gallop through it real quick. And I used this at the breakfast yesterday. After Hurricane Helene, Northeast Tennessee, Unicoi County, flooding in that small community, a small community hospital, right? Water started to overtake the first floor of that hospital. The administrators of that hospital made a call. Major General Nub Ross, the Adjutant General of Tennessee, got wind of it, sprung into action. Water began to overtake the second floor of that hospital. staff, patients, civilians moved to the rooftop of that hospital. Within just a matter of hours, 3 UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters came out of McGee-Tyson in and around Knoxville, flew to Unicoi County, and took 58 people off the roof of that hospital to safety. That's right. Now that speaks to who we are as a National Guard. And you know why they were able to do that? Because they're ready for combat. They're RL progressed aviators that can fly in combat. They can fly, fight, and win. Because they're ready for combat, they're ready for anything. They were ready to take those 58 people off that daggum hospital roof and get them to safety, right? So that just needs to be our focus. If we are ready for combat as an organization, we will be ready for anything. We'll be agile and quick, responsive to the needs of our citizens and our governors, and we will be ready to respond, deploy, fight, and win our nation's wars. So be proud of who you are and what you do. We are absolutely first choice, indispensable force for our nation. There are great challenges ahead. We talk about fiscal challenges. We talk about the challenges in time, just the societal challenges that are out there, right? Headwinds, great headwinds. But with challenges come extraordinary opportunity. You know, when I look around this room and I see our National Guardsmen, I see our retirees, I see our joint force allies, partners, and friends, right? I see members of industry, academia, folks with great big ideas. I got an Arkansas friend, Lee Watson, right there from Forge Institute, and the things that he's doing in the space as it relates to intelligence, right? He was a partner for me in Arkansas. We are all in this together. And that gentleman that stood up and asked the question, I'm just a civilian. No, he's a partner because he's here. And he wants to be a part of the solution. We're not going to figure it out on our own. We're going to figure it out together. And the nation demands it. The nation demands it. This is our time. Okay? This is our October 1940. And we've got to get ready. We've got to get ready. And we've got to be urgent about it. Because here's the deal. If we can demonstrate to our adversaries that we are a fully manned organization comprised of high-quality individuals, great men and women of character, strength, grit, determination, that are well-trained, if our adversaries see that, then they see these individuals aggregate into these lethal units that can fight and win, that can work together on the battlefield. And if we can demonstrate that we can go anywhere, whether it be through a global force management, a gift map rotation, an emergent campaign deployment, or even inside here in the homeland responding to the needs of our governor, our adversaries are watching. And if they see that, maybe they won't want to fight. And we can deter war. And that needs to be our focus. But in order to do that, we have got to be urgent in everything that we do. We cannot waste time. We cannot waste money. And we cannot take our people for granted. We must be urgent. And again, we're going to be urgent together. We're ready for combat. We're ready for anything. We are part of the Army. And the Army says this will defend. So I say,